I'm sure you're all familiar with left organizations who hold schools, invite people from all over the place, uh, and then end up with the guru urging them all to join the party. Uh, well, this isn't quite like this. The way in which I'm going to approach this question is I'm going to try and apply. I'm going to frighten you all to death. I'm going to apply a dialectical method, and that is I'm going to look at the material basis of current events and current consciousness, and then look at the ideologies and beliefs that arise from that. So I'm an ex-68er, very much ex-68er, and so there was material base to this sudden radical explosion that marked 1968, and essentially the material base was the post-war boom. So capitalism got a big lift, rebuilding on the ruins left after the Second World War. And because capitalism got a boost, so also did the working class. At times of mass production, workers are able to build better conditions and so on. And in addition to the post-war boom, there was also the 1948 Education Act, of which I was a beneficiary. So it's hard to describe the consciousness that produced. That led to the civil rights movement in Ireland, to the May events in France, and so on. And essentially, there was a popular consciousness that was revolutionary. Most young people I knew agreed that capitalism had to be overthrown. It was anti-imperialist, and it was driven by a foolish hope. As young people, we thought nobody had these ideas before, and that if we applied them enthusiastic enough, we were bound to succeed. And again, it was all driven by morale, because there'd been a series of victories for the working class and for young people. That filled us with the confidence that we could do more. Now, that post-war boom started to run out of steam and decline in the 70s. And that decline in the 70s meant a greater aggressiveness by the capitalist class, and it meant a decline in overall working class resistance. And there was a rise of the right wing, and you gradually started to see the decay of the USSR. The main thing, the main struggle of that time, at the end of the 70s, was the defeat of the miners, and the rise of Thatcherism. And it's worth noting that the assault by Thatcherism did not solve anything. In fact, the Brexiteers are living in the ruins of Thatcherism. Other European countries have mass transport. We've got a decaying privatized railway system. European countries still retain mass public housing, and there's absolute housing chaos in Britain and so on. Now, so on that basis, you got the rise of neoliberalism, which is essentially just a new aggressiveness by the capitalists and a new willingness to force the working class back. And in the face of that new aggressiveness, which again is driven by the weakness of production, the weakness of the profit production, and so on, you saw a series of decays. So the first decay was the decay of Stalinism, which ended up I mean, the difficulty for the Stalinists is that they believed in peaceful coexistence, but Reagan and Thatcher didn't. So they were always outmaneuvered, and they were outmaneuvered by aggression on the outside and decay on the inside. I don't know if people remember, but when the Soviets announced that they were going to open up perestroika and glasnost and new negotiations to allow greater democracy, that sort of thing. That's when Reagan launched the Empire of Evil. But he knew at the time that the Soviet Union was in a state of decline, and his first reaction was to launch a new offensive to bring it down quicker. And there's a famous story of the CIA director telling the agents that they had to push a series of stories about Russian revolutionary activities across the globe, and the agents protested and said, "But they're not true." Everyone says, "How do you know they're not true?" Well, we made them up. That's right. That's why they're out there. We're the guys who invented them. But they went ahead with a deep offensive against revolutionary movements anywhere. Now, behind the decay of socialism, you saw the decay of laborism. And laborism is based on the ability to divert a small fraction of profits towards a welfare state. And in fact, it's only in imperialist countries where you have mass labour parties that are successful. And it turned out that the labour parties and the social democratic parties weren't able to produce a reformist program, because the reformist program involved extracting more from the capitalist class, and they weren't able to do it. It was no longer possible to do that. So there's a long period of all these social democratic parties and labour parties committing suicide. The last example, of course, being the collapse of Corbynism. And anybody familiar with politics will know that Corbyn's program was a very mild social democratic program, but it was 1,000 times more than the Labour establishment could permit. And part of the immense frozen barren wasteland of British politics at the moment is that the opposition is Keir Starmer, who won't oppose anything, and has now started to wrap both the Union Jack around him and more recently made a grab for the anti-migrant vote. Now, that decline did not stop with Labour or the Social Democrats. It went on to affect, in fact, the what would be called the revolutionary left. And it was most apparent, I think, not just now, but it was most apparent in the organisation I recently belonged to, the Fourth International. So they came up with this long period called the Broad Left, where essentially the idea was that you would dissolve your own political program and join up with the fragments of social democracy and Eurocommunism and so on. And that would work great because there was a room for the left now that the Social Democrats had retreated. But it turned out there wasn't any room. They were retreating, and the revolutionary left joined the retreat. So you had the broad parties, which went nowhere. The last big broad party example was Syriza, which collapsed unceremoniously in the face of pressure from Europe. And after that, you had a period where people talked about useful parties. We will support useful parties. And what they meant by that was electoral parties. Anybody can get a hold on a vote, anybody can hold a position, that will do, and program no more accounts. And very recently, the last World Congress of the Fourth International called for anti-systemic movements, not parties, not anything to do with the workers, just anything. And essentially, they give a sort of glimpse of what these parties would be like, because they would be feminist and they would be queer. But there was no mention of them being working class. You know, that had disappeared from the action. And I'll just mention um, um, that in Ireland, although people probably aren't aware of it, essentially the Irish left, the Socialist Party and the Socialist Party, embarked on the broad left strategy, but without a major social democratic formation they could align with. So, in other European states, people says, well, we dump any aspect of revolution in order to join up with A or B. But in Ireland, we just says we dump all reference to revolution and just have this reforms program. And I think people should be aware of how reforms the program is. The central element of Irish society is generous tax rates for transnationals. Now, the program of the Socialist and SWP is that they should pay the full rate. That is, if it's 12.5%, we should get the ground or go around, because we know we're not all paying it. But there was never any demand that they should pay more, which would be, a fairly modest, radical demand to get more tax out of these buggers. So there was the defeat of the miners' strike. There was the defeat of the what were the air traffic controllers under Reagan, and then there was the defeat of the Soviet Union and the collapse of the USSR. And the main way that expressed itself was in terms of peace processes. And people talk about the peace process in Ireland, and it's always seen as some unique event. It happened by itself. People got together. There was talks for this and that and the other thing, and the light was seen, and talks went on till everybody got together. But the Irish peace process is identical to a whole series, and the foundation of those events was not in Ireland so much, but in every other country. It was the USSR had collapsed. The minor level of support that it gave to national liberation struggles, alongside the possibility of being able to hold out if you managed to get hold of power in your own country, those all went away. So all these national liberation struggles had to do deals, and essentially all these deals were a way of surrendering gracefully and accepting all the policies that they'd. Now in Ireland, it's slightly different in that the Provos had no direct connection with the USSR. What they were connected to was the Irish in America. But the Irish in America were displaced, the sort of petty bourgeois were displaced by US imperialism, who suddenly realized they wanted this thing settled and it was possible to settle it, and that's what they went ahead and did. And the peace process, as I said to somebody else recently, what people don't get about it, we opposed it, and we had to oppose it. And that was very difficult, because from the signing for 25 years, people said, you're opposed it. You clearly want to grab guns, go out on the street and start the fighting all over again. But we had to oppose it because the Good Friday Agreement is founded upon identity. So the language of republicanism and leftism was the language of anti-imperialist struggle. What are the Provos doing? They're trying to fight British occupation in Ireland. And after the Good Friday Agreement, everybody agreed, including the provost, no, that wasn't what happened at all. There was a cultural difference, a communal difference between Celtic and Protestants, and the British were just here to give us a helping hand, and now they've helped us on to peace in our time. And that identity politics was closely bound up with identity politics more generally. And one of the things I haven't mentioned, and I probably won't get to in any detail, is the decay of science. The rise of the scientific method was never universally accepted by capitalism. What they accepted pretty happily was physics. They weren't at all happy with biology, which is still contested. They weren't happy with economics, and they weren't happy with psychology and sociology. So in those areas, capitalism was not so very pro-science. And what happened is we can now talk about the decay of capitalism. Now, one of the things that happens in the decay of capitalism is that the major capitalist powers switch to finance, and in finance, they tend to concentrate more on the extraction of value rather than the production. So in the 1930s, you could have a gang of workers working down the mine, and 18 tons, and what I get an hour day older and deeper in debt, the amount of money you got for the value you were producing was quite low. But in late capitalism, you're still not paid very much, but what's happening is enormous amounts of value are being taken out of you in the form of rent, say in the form of straight rent, or in the form of mortgage, but also in the form of just debt in general. And that changes the nature of capital. And the thing that came to my attention was the tobacco industry. So the tobacco industry in America realized that scientific evidence was building up at the horrible effects of tobacco on people's bodies. So what they did was they set up their own group of scientists who would produce papers to say that nicotine in the oil compounds would put a string in your step, and or saying, well, people are publishing these papers, but it's just a debate. It's a debate. Nobody knows what tobacco, because we say it doesn't do any harm, and the other scientists say it does. Now, that method has also gone forward to climate science. And we've seen the disastrous results last week. There's now a whole coterie of so-called scientists who will argue that there isn't any climate change. And what the capitalists will say, they'd say there's a debate. There's a debate, and of course we in the oil companies will take steps to save the planet, but there's a debate. There's we'll have to decide what to do and take our time. And that has and I want to add one other thing that was mentioned in one of the other discussions, which is the decline of education. I spent most of my life as a science teacher, and I suspected for some time that I was no longer teaching science because the subject was being valorized. That is, it was split into little bits, and essentially the idea was that you would pay for different bits, add them together, and that additive would give added value to your labour. But it meant nobody knew anything. The sort of broad discipline of the subject of science, biology, physics has gone not from anywhere, everywhere, but from the secondary schools. You would have to struggle as a student to get these things, and that's also the case in tertiary education. Tertiary education, the science is based on PhD, and PhD students have almost no money and no job continuity. They're basically the academic equivalent of people turning up at the docks to see if there's any work that day. They're completely disorganized, and HR and the hierarchy can do anything they want with them. So the reason I'm laying stress on this is that in the absence, science in the past was linked to production. You learned science in school because you were going to go into production. Now, that doesn't happen in Britain today. You don't learn science at school and you don't go into production. Only about 13% of the economy is in production. So there's no need to be scientifically literate. And that's one of the grounds on which gender ideology and so on that's where they arise from. That's the fertile ground where you can believe anything you want. So where are we now? We're in late capitalism. Now, some people have argued some economists argue that the class struggle has changed under late capitalism. And the way in which it's changed is the class struggle has now differentiated geographically between north and south. Essentially, the working class is in the south and the bourgeoisie are in the north. Most people don't accept that, but there's a grain of truth to it, in the sense that although class struggle continues in advanced capitalist countries, very often it's not directly around production. So the class struggles you see in Britain today, for example, are around postal workers, health workers, transport workers and teachers. There's no bad thing. There's still class struggles, but it does mean there's a strong case for the globalization of the labour movement. You've also got the struggle for US hegemony, which has taken a very dramatic turn, because under Trump, you had a sort of a chaotic withdrawal from the world stage, or certain parts of the world stage. And when Biden got in, that was his first task to restore US authority. So he refused to ratify the agreement with Iran. He put pressure on Latin American countries. He's built up a new military alliance in the South China Sea, and essentially the proxy war in Ukraine has the purpose of crushing Russia, or degrading Russia, and at the same time it lays US authority on Western Europe, which is suffering terribly because of the sanctions. And all of this has to be put into the context that if things remain the way they are, there can be no doubt that the US is going to launch a war on China. It's not there immediately, but all these military efforts will end up in an attempt to subdue China. So how do lefties, a small crowd of lefties, a large whack of the socialist movement in tailspin around things like gender equality, and it's not just gender. So uh, the eco-socialist movement is a hive of sort of conflicting ideas, none of which are linked too closely to class. And you've now got a new movement, which I can't say I know a lot about, but I'm highly suspicious of it. And this is the movement of degrowth. And so it's sort of saying we can have, essentially, these are reformist movements saying we can improve capitalism by cutting down on growth so it can survive, the climate can survive better. Whereas, I mean, the Marxist perspective is what we need is to end the rule of the commodity. As long as the commodity rules, the production of commodities has to increase and increase to produce profit. And unless we're able to put a stop to that, then climate destruction will continue. So, praxis. Well, praxis has to be, sorry, I'll go back. I've avoided quoting learned Marxist texts, but I'm going to quote Leon Trotsky for a moment. He was on trial in the 1905, after the 1905 revolution, and the charge was that he was preparing a revolution. And Trotsky's defense was, no, I was preparing for a revolution. It's not the revolutionaries who make revolutions, it's the working class. But I was trying to be organized so that I could help the working class. And I think that's, I mean, he didn't get off it. He went to jail anyway. But I think, you know, we have to be aware of that. People sort of think of being a socialist, that we have to talk the working class into staging a revolution. And we don't have to do that. The working class will stage a revolution when they feel they are able to. And when they feel they're not able to, they'll pay no attention at all, by and large. So what can we do as socialists? We can involve ourselves in the class struggle that goes on all the time. There's always class struggle. Class struggle goes on every day. People may not be aware of the consequences. The difficulty for socialists is they have to have some class analysis to begin with. And then they have to say, these particular issues are important, right? So, as I said earlier, we decided to oppose the Good Friday Agreement. And it made us very unpopular. It sent us into decline and isolation. But there wasn't any way around it. You know, class consciousness had to be based. So we actually had to wait for people to start to have doubts about the ability. And that actually hasn't really happened yet. You know, yet again, the Stormont administration is in collapse. And the main slogan in the papers, we have to get Stormont up and working. Stormont has never been up and working. You know, when they're sitting, they're just busily sharing out sectarian spoils. And the only thing they do in the nature of government is rubber stamp whatever the British budget allows them to do. So we felt that we had to oppose gender ideology, because gender ideology is a form of magical thinking. You know, you really can't preach revolution to people who think there's unicorns. It's not a going concern. We have difficulty. There's an obvious thing. Oh, and Ukraine. I mean, it seemed to us obvious right away that Ukraine is a proxy war. It's the recomposition of the US trying to reconstitute a unipolar world where they rule more or less. And from our point of view, it's not a matter of looking at the to and fro in Ukraine. You've got to look at the sanctions war against Russia, at the crippling effect of sanctions on European countries, and at the attempt by the Americans to retain control of the world banking system and to exclude anybody who they can't rule by military means, and also, of course, the absolute danger of nuclear war, because the only country in this dispute that isn't bound by any no first use restrictions doctrine is the US. The US will use nuclear weapons first and has used nuclear weapons first if it meets requirements. And they spent the last 30 years developing battlefield nuclear weapons that they would like to use. Now, there's a difficulty, which I'll just mention. And the difficulty is that opportunism doesn't work. So if workers move into struggle, you should be supporting them, but you shouldn't be trailing along behind them saying, me too. And the best example of that in Ireland is partnership. Ireland is a tax haven. Ireland is totally under the domination of transnational capital. The government is set up to ease the way for transnational capital. And by and large, most people, although they may resent it, don't see any alternative. And for that reason, the trade unions have essentially become firmly attached to the state and make secret agreements, which they then impose on the workers. And the socialists have decided to go along with that. A very good example is Raise the Roof. Now, Raise the Roof, over a couple of years, from 2011, held fairly major demonstrations. Now, they were by no means revolutionary. What the unions were doing was using the demonstration to try and put a last bit of pressure on the budget. It always happened in this September because the budget was in October. And if you got 20,000 or 30,000 out in the streets, that was the last squeeze in the government to see what you could get. Now, 2 or 3 years ago, the government said, fair enough, we will commit $1.5 billion to the housing budget. The unions called off their demonstration because of COVID. They said they've never held another one. Heck, they have never involved. In fact, Patricia King is now on the committee that implements the housing program. Unfortunately, the housing program is essentially built around a determination to award capital investment with a 4% return. As Conor McCabe said, the best you can get in Amsterdam is 2%. So this works wonders in attracting transnational capital to Ireland, but it doesn't actually resolve the housing crisis, which will continue. And unfortunately, the thing is that the left are now holding demonstrations under the title Raise the Roof, because the way of thinking is ICTU have withdrawn from this field. We can administer it. And if we administer it, we will build our own organizations. But what's happening there is the question of a radical alternative is being taken off the table. And you would need a mass mobilization around demand for public housing to break the housing crisis, and nobody would do that. So I'm not sure that's 100% clear. That's the problem with giving open-ended discussions instead of the answers at the end of the book. But what it is we have to intervene, and we have tried to intervene given our small size. We've had to cooperate with other socialists, and we have been doing that. And but the thing is, you have to pick which events are important. So we're saying Ukraine's important, although very few people agree with us at the moment about that. Gender identity is important. Um, the cost of living, or the cost of profit crisis, is important, but only if it aims to break from partnership and aims for direct conflict with the government. People are, you have, people, if you call it cost of living, people get out violins and play the violin. If you call it the cost of profitability, then you might get a few people throwing bricks. But so the chief task, the chief thing we can do, and we're capable of, is we can do theory. And the theory is the foundation of action. And we clearly need new theory. And the new theory rests on a description of capitalism. And that description of capitalism is a global society that is constantly trying to squeeze profit from both ends of the spectrum, from the world of work and from the world of consumption, that is piling debt upon debt on the working class, and is becoming more and more domestically and militarily aggressive, both at home and abroad, and has now become expert at using reactionary ideologies to divide and conquer the working class. And that's where you start from. You just start from a description of reality. And the description of reality is of what is important to the class, not what's important to you.